It is an honor today to have Tabatha Perry with us on the podcast. Tabatha is the ultimate go-to for women who are the non-9 to 5ers. And I can't wait to hear more about this. She equips and encourages women who are wanting less chaos and to get their daily life on track. With over 15 years of experience in the criminal justice system, 20 plus moves under her belt, a master's in social work, girl mom, wife, life coach. She's got advice that is going to make any day less stressful for the woman who's juggling many balls in the air. As a professional overthinker, she's learned how to simplify her day and loves helping women create simple and small edits in their daily life so they step into their fullest God-given potential. Tabatha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, William. I'm excited about this.
This is going to be a great conversation. I want to start. I would love for you to share some of your story with our listeners, particularly about your journey and development as a leader. How did you get started?
Well, some of us didn't really know we were leaders until you're kind of in the thick of it and you're like, oh, I realize now that I kind of take on responsibility wherever I go. And it started as a kid. I was an only child. And so in order to, make things happen, I grew up in Alaska. So there wasn't a whole lot to do in our town except for like play outside.
Yeah.
And so there was all these boys in my neighborhood. And I knew like I wanted to go outside and play, but like I needed to, organize them and get them to like, let's go do an activity together. I'm not just going to sit around and, play on a skateboard. Like, let's go build something.
Yeah.
So even looking back when I was younger, I started just leading people, just guiding, kind of coming up with a common idea that everyone wanted to do and then helped go to that idea. And then that kind of extended into school, taking on different leadership positions of mostly like mentoring. I've always just had a heart for people and just see people for who they are and not what they do. And that also, developed into working in the criminal justice system and leading people that didn't want to be led. And so that was very humbling to really just kind of figure out where I stood and kind of release and surrender a lot of control.
Wow. That is a lot of experience and a lot of different things.
And I haven't even started on leading my kids yet, right? Like that's a whole other ball game.
That's a whole nother episode, really.
Yep.
So, I mean, in all those different contexts, how would you define leadership, the through line that runs through all of that?
Yeah, so I kind of view myself as someone who guides and directs people and then takes the responsibility on. So if I guide someone or misdirect in a way and there's maybe like a negative consequence, me as a leader is going to step in and like help the situation and like help figure it out. And this has a lot to do with me figuring out boundaries, right? Because there's certain things I am responsible for and certain things other people are. So I think as a leader too, I've had to kind of figure out where that line of responsibility is so I don't take on too much, but also own my own stuff and help others kind of work through theirs.
I love that. This is one of the things that I will talk with people about all the time is establishing healthy boundaries.
Yes.
What drove you to do that?
Well, overwhelm, depression, anxiety. I didn't like the alternative, honestly. But honestly, my mom was really good about talking about boundaries with me from a very, very young age. So my dad was an alcoholic and she went through counseling and it's through Al-Anon, which is like support for people who are married to someone with alcoholism. Anyhow, so she just kind of wanted to share with me the tools she was using. And so I remember at a young age, like role playing with her. If someone says, do you want to do drugs? What do you say? And, if someone wants to, tell you something that, you just aren't equipped to like deal with, what do you say? And like had these opportunities to kind of figure out what I was responsible for and what other people were. Now, have I been perfect at it? Absolutely not. But I feel like that was a really good foundation. And not a lot of people get that foundation. A lot of people are figuring out boundaries as adults after really getting burned and overwhelmed a lot.
That's so good. Learning to own what's yours and not owning what somebody else's and letting them or helping them to own their own stuff. And that is a leadership skill that we don't talk about enough. And I love that
Mm.
you're talking about that.
Yes. Well, again, as someone who's just, I am like the queen of responsibility. Like, I don't
Yeah.
pride myself on being the fun one at the party. I'm the one that's like, did we get things cleaned up? Is everyone okay? Do you need a snack? Do you need a beverage? Right. And so I can just put too much stuff on myself. And then I don't show up as my fun, nice, kind, gentle self because I'm overwhelmed. But
Yeah.
I did it to myself. No one did it
Mm.
to me. And many times we get frustrated with where we're at because we don't own that we actually did this to ourselves. Very few people have things happen to them. And that's why it's really interesting to have my background in criminal justice, because there's people in prisons who literally have had all their freedoms taken away, right? And
Mhm.
they still choose to take responsibility for themselves and sometimes live freer than some of us that are not in prison, because they've realized what they're responsible for and they're going to work on it. And they know that it's nobody else's responsibility to help them. Like, they need to do it. And so I learned so much from the people that I worked with in prison.
That's so good. Listeners, I really hope you're capturing this, because what she just said, you're going to want to go back and reflect on. Think about, are you living a life in freedom or not? Are you putting bars on your own life? Nobody else is putting them on. Are you putting them on yourself? That's so good, Tabatha. So I'm guessing that you've got some routines in your life to help you with boundaries, to help you with productivity and the things that you do. What are some of your morning and your evening routines?
Sure. So I can totally nerd out talking about routines. And I realize that some people are like, this is the most boring thing ever. But here's my like, call to action on taking on these boring routines is that we have to make so many decisions throughout the day. Like, what if we were kind enough to our brain to do things enough that it becomes so routine, you don't even think about it anymore. Like, tying your shoe, driving. Those were things that like took a lot of effort. As I'm teaching my 5-year-old how to tie her shoe, right? It takes a lot of effort, but eventually becomes so easy. And so I started doing these routines not because that's the cool thing to do, but because it's super helpful and I get overwhelmed easy. And so I want to be nice to my brain. So having a very specific time I start going to bed, because for women, we have like an hour-long process, right? We're putting on our lotions and taking things off and putting things on. So I know that when it's time to go to bed, I need to give myself some prep time and also to like relax my system.
Yeah.
And so something that I've learned a lot is to kind of tap into the parasympathetic
Mm.
um,
Mhm.
system. And by, lavender scent, like
Mhm.
whatever, I found some things that have helped me, but I think it's so important for people to actually take responsibility, lead yourself, right?
Mhm.
And find things that actually calm your system down before you go to bed. Because when you have that sleep, then you are going to like show up so much better, not just for yourself, but for other people as well. And then in the morning, I have a very consistent wake up time. My
Mm.
brain knows what time to wake up. Now I still use an alarm clock, but it's amazing on the weekends when I don't set an alarm, then my body just wakes up at that time,
Yeah.
but as a mom and as a business owner, I've needed to get up early to get things done before my kids wake up because I want to be
Mhm.
able to focus on them. And honestly, I have no capacity to focus on anything else besides my
Sure.
kids when they wake up. So going to bed by 9 and waking up by 5, it sounds, not fun to a lot of people. And they're like, what are you, like 60, 70 years old? I'm like, no, I'm 37 and I like going to bed early and I like waking up early. So those are kind of some of the like the I don't know, the book ending and bookmarking routines that I really enjoy doing. That's really helped me, again, not have to make so many decisions. Because how many times do you sit with Netflix and you're like, should I watch another show? Or should I
Mhm.
read another page in my book? And then you kind of go back and you have this mind drama and then it drains you even more. But if you know every day I go into my room at 9 o'clock to start getting ready for bed, then it's just less drama.
That's so good. The interesting thing, you said people push back and they're like, what, how old are you? Every high capacity leader I know talks about what you're describing.
Mm,
Consistent rhythms, like building this into their life, where every day Every evening, every morning, it's the same type of rhythm. They're going to go to
Yeah.
bed early. They're going to get up early. And that rhythm that they've taught their body over time bears so much fruit. I feel healthier when I go to bed at the same time I get up at the same time every day. I feel healthier. I feel
Yes.
like
And it
I'm
doesn't
getting
have to
more
be
done.
early, right? Like there's some people who are night owls, and that's why I love working with like the non 9 to 5ers because they have kind of like a maybe weird
Mhm.
schedule. So if it's better to go to bed at midnight and then wake up at 7 a.m., then
Mhm.
you should do that. The whole point is to figure out what routine works for you and to help your
Yes.
brain so it doesn't
Yes.
have to make so many decisions.
So good. So, what is one thing that everybody should do to start creating order in their life?
The first thing that someone needs to do is they need to figure out who they are. Because by understanding where your values are and your strengths are, then creating that order will come because creating order is messy, right? Anyone
Hmm.
who's ever tried to organize, your pantry or your closet, you got to take everything out and figure out what you have to put it back in. So as people, we need to figure out like kind of take an audit like who am I even, because we evolve, well, we're supposed to evolve and develop over time, right, and
Yep.
change. So making sure to check in with yourself on where you're at, so then that way when leaders are involved in so many different committees and they've got different business ventures and just different meetings to attend, being able to figure out like what they value, if they value family or if it is independence, well, then operating out of that value. So that way
Mm.
that order makes sense to them because my order is going to look different than your order. And
Yeah.
it's going to look different than anyone's because we're all created uniquely and we all have these amazing purposes that we were created to live out. And so
Mm.
we got to check back in with how we were created so we can step into that purpose.
That's so good. That's so good. You're born and raised in Alaska.
Yep.
I got to tell you, I think you're the first person I've ever met born and raised in Alaska.
Oh, very fun.
That's cool. So, what's your favorite thing about that?
I love the people. So in Alaska, most people that you meet there are not born and raised. So all of us who are born and raised there leave, and then all these new people kind of go up there. So around holidays is you always have kind of this random assortment of people from all over the world, even
Uh-huh.
where I've lived in Texas and Colorado, and I live here in Minnesota. It's not really like that. People kind of
Yeah.
are born and raised and
Yeah.
they stick to their family during holidays. So that was kind of a culture shock to leave Alaska and realize like, how come no one's inviting us to holidays? Like that's just what you do. Every holiday, my parents, my mom would invite different people over and it was just this neat community. And also the resourcefulness, because in Alaska, having barges bring things up or fly in, a lot of times it gets delayed. So you don't have as many resources. So you have to like trade with your neighbor, like, hey, I caught, 5 salmon. You got a moose. Do you want to trade some moose meat for some salmon? Like
That's
do things
awesome.
like that.
I love that. And I totally get what you're saying. I mean, I'm outside DC, right?
Oh,
Nobody's
yeah.
from here. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been here almost 20 years, just over 18 years now. So few people. I bet I can count on two hands the number of people I've met who were born and raised here. Everybody comes here, they're here for 3, 4, 5 years, and then they're gone. You
Yeah.
know, I'm from Alabama originally. Like most of the people that I knew growing up, they still live there. Like
Yes.
that's normal. This area sounds much more like what Alaska was.
Yes. And isn't it neat to just be able to like meet people who are willing to uproot themselves and have the confidence to go start something. And it's really exciting.
I love it. And you meet people from all over. Not yet from Alaska, but now I can say
Right.
Alaska. So
Now
that's
you do.
so what do you like most about what you do as a life coach?
I love seeing the light bulb go off in a woman's like mind of like this mindset shift of basically like this freedom aspect that we kind of talked
Mm,
about before of like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, I've been limiting myself because again, no one is limiting ourselves. It's all in our mind. And so to help walk a woman through like belief systems that she's had and maybe choices she's made that has allowed her to, be overscheduled and overwhelmed and overtired. And now she's like, oh, like I have the power to stop this and I don't have
Hmm.
to feel guilty about it, and helping them create those boundaries in their life and not feel like they have to people please. Like
Yeah.
it is, it is amazing because I went through that process myself. And so,
Mm.
when you see other
Yeah.
people going through what you went through, and then you see relief in
Yeah.
them, it
Yeah.
makes it so worth it.
I love that. You talked about the one thing everybody should do to start creating order in their life. What's the worst thing, in your opinion, that everybody does that sabotages their success?
Mm. The worst thing, I think, is not being aware of the distractions that your brain loves. So our
Mm.
brain really only holds on to like 5 or 6 kind of phrases that can distract us. Like, you don't need to do that right now, or you can start tomorrow.
Mm.
There's just these yummy phrases our brain holds on to. And if we don't take the time to kind of understand when our brain's trying to distract us, because our brain doesn't want to overwork. It's
Yeah.
hard to think a lot, so it's just going to give us like a little distraction, to take
Yeah.
away all of that power. And so I think that's kind of the worst thing that someone can do, because to create order takes energy and takes a lot of direction and discipline. And so when you're distracted, it takes longer to get that order.
Well, speaking of distraction, what do you think distracts people most from accomplishing their goals? Is it internal or is it external?
Well, I would, it depends on who you talk to, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a lot of the women that I work with, it's the kids, it's the obligations, it's the responsibility, like external, but really it's the value that we
Yeah.
put on it. And
Yeah.
so it's those internal beliefs that I have to do X in order to have value. I have to do this thing in order for someone to like pay attention to me, in order to
Mhm.
be loved. And we don't necessarily think of it like that boldly, but that's really what it comes down to.
And you have some influence with that internal voice,
Yeah.
right? That's good.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes we just need someone from the outside to point out, be like, it's really interesting that you say XYZ. Do you know that
Yeah.
you say that often? Do you
Yeah.
believe that? Like, oh, wow, like I didn't even realize that. My husband and I, we use the language of cancel. Like if I'll say
Mm.
something negative, he'll be like, cancel that.
Ah,
Like,
nice, nice,
right? And be like,
nice.
oh, yeah, you're right. Or like, I don't want to. Like, no,
Yeah.
I'm just going to be in like my pity party for a minute and then I will redo it. But, just helping have that someone to point that out, and someone that's doing it, that there's no motive, because we can
Yeah.
talk to our parents, we can talk to our friends, our spouse, but people who care about us, they have a motive.
Mhm.
Whereas when you hire a coach, it's
Mhm.
completely neutral. The whole
Mhm.
point is to allow them to kind of figure out what's going on with them.
That's
There's no
good.
motive for me. And so just letting someone process and come to their own conclusions is it's pretty great.
It's so hard to see the whole picture when you're in the frame.
Yeah,
And that's where it's so nice to have somebody from the outside who is for you, right? Who is cheering you on and wants you to be the best version of yourself. I
absolutely.
love the power of that.
And as leaders, I think it's so important we have people cheering us on. So if we have to hire someone to do that, well, you know what? You get things done, right? We need to have
Yep.
those people speaking into us, because the higher you get, the lonelier it gets and the more responsibility. And honestly, the bigger the target. And so,
Mhm.
if you want to go at it alone, you can, what's that saying? If you want to go fast, go alone. If
Yeah,
you want to go farther, go with someone else. And so
that's
again,
good.
hiring someone, or even if you have a friend or someone who's going through the same things, talking with them and just encouraging each other is huge.
Hiring a leadership coach was one of the best investments I ever made in my own journey,
It's
because
great.
that coach helps me and has helped me for years, like you said, to go farther than I ever could have gone by myself,
And I'm
because you
sure that
can't see.
coach, yeah, pointed those things out that you're like, oh, and
Yep.
if your wife had pointed it out, if your,
Right.
kids or so, like I wouldn't have gone over as good.
We tend to push back on those things a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, yep, yep. But like, oh yeah, I'm paying you to tell me
That's
these
right.
things.
That's
Like, all
right.
right, this is fair. Like, I expect to be convicted, please.
Exactly. Tell me my blind spots because I can't see them.
Yes.
So, what makes the nine to fiver special? I mean, you really focus in on that. This non nine to five. What makes a non nine to fiver special?
Sure. So, what I found when I started my business was that a lot of the coaches were focusing on like being a business coach or being a health coach and kind of working with this construct of like a certain type of person. And so I knew that I needed to kind of like who was I passionate about? And it was this woman that, maybe she, works in her home, taking care of her family, but she also has a side business.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's someone who's in financial services where they get to create their own schedule. And a lot of times the freedom that we have in time, as much as we want that freedom, we don't know how to handle it. And so talking about the non-9 to 5er is just this person that is able to think outside of the box, is able to create the life that they want, but they're not sure how. And they've honestly let other people influence them and just haven't been intentional with how they spend their time. And so helping them kind of take a step back, look at their life, kind of do an audit, a time audit, an energy audit of like, what is going on with your life? Like, do you feel good with it? Like, are you feeling like it's going to get you to your goals? And then helping them identify those pain points and working through those has been really a fun experience too, because I get to kind of see different people's schedules. I do a schedule makeover with people sometimes where I literally sit down and it's like, okay, what do you have going on in the week? How can we make this work easier? And like, where is your energy drained? Where can we put things in it that actually increase your energy? When you got to go, to this one meeting and you always leave drained, what can you do after to, build yourself up? Things like that.
Asking the questions that maybe nobody else will ask.
Right. Because, schedules can be boring, but I love them.
I love that. So you talk about how many Christians are not living up to their fullest potential. Why do you think that is?
Well, it goes back to this kind of prison, this expectations that we put on ourselves. And I can only speak from like my perspective, but from a woman, there's this unsaid expectation that a good Christian woman will quit her job once she gets married and has babies and raise the babies and take care of the house. And this is like what an ideal life looks like. And I started to do that. And I realized I was like, oh my gosh, this is not what I thought. Right. Yeah. And so I see so many other women also struggling with that, but they keep forcing themselves to just stay in this small life, honestly, very small, like minded, not in a condescending way, but in a, like, I just need to have my kids survive. I just need to get them to their practice. Like, I know that God created you for like way more things than that. And yes, maybe right now that's a season, but there's a season of preparation. Like we are capable of being intentional with our time. So we could also be developing our mind, developing our leadership skills, as well as taking our kids to hockey and doing things like that. So I just see like Christian women holding themselves back because they kind of put themselves into this box of what life is supposed to look like. But honestly, our life is supposed to look different than the world, different even than from other people in our church. And so I just want to encourage any woman that feels like, I want to be a leader. I have this desire in my heart, but right now I just have to buckle down and raise the kids. Like, what if you could do both? Like not overschedule, not like overwhelm yourself, but what if there was a way to do a little of both? And just to have that opportunity to think on it, I think is important.
I just want to take that clip of what you just said, and I want to play that for everyone, like everyone, everywhere, everyone, because I think you nailed it. There is this idea that we're supposed to, if you're this, then you're supposed to be this, then your life should look like this. I had a counselor tell me years ago, and I thought this was a bit bold at the time, but she was spot on. She said, you use the word should a lot when you're talking about yourself. And she said, you need to stop shoulding all over yourself. And I thought, wow. You know what? We all do that. Yeah. My life should look like this. I should do that. I should be this. I should be happy doing this. I should be fulfilled doing this. Man, I want my daughters to hear what you just said. Because I think there's so much freedom there. Yeah.
And that's how God wants us to live. He wants us to live in freedom. Yes. And I think that there's a difference between chaos and the messiness of figuring out what you want. And again, I'm all about creating order in the chaos. So the difference is that if you're in, like, whoever you are, if you're in a situation and it has been chaotic for a while, your spirit is disrupted, like just things feel off, you don't feel yourself, you may want to reevaluate again, like who God created you to be and what you want. Like, what is it that you truly want?
That's
And
good.
if you realize, okay, you know what I want is actually right now. Like I'm just in a mess because I'm a big learning curve and you can see the end. But if you realize you're like, I am not where I want to be, this is nothing to do, then that's where you can, either reframe your mindset to have a better attitude about it or make a change because nobody else is going to live your life for you.
That is true. That is true. You talk about learning, and obviously you're a learner. Like you are just a continual learner. What's your favorite way to learn?
I really enjoy reading, but I say that like an actual book that I can like write in.
Yes.
So all of my little like underlines and notes, but then I take it, further and then I'll Google words and then I'll do like YouTube videos to concepts. And so it starts with a book. I've been trying to reduce my screen time, like accessing my phone. And before, there was a before cell phone. I actually just carried a book around with me in my purse.
It's true.
I've started doing that now. I'm like, I just will read my paper book instead of pulling out my phone if I'm waiting for things inevitably, right? So that's my favorite way to learn is to read.
So then what's a favorite book that you would recommend that our listeners read?
Well, there, of course there's a couple, readers can never just choose one, right?
It's like picking one of your kids, right?
I know for sure. Well, it depends on the day. And then I have a favorite, honestly. But I think, so 3 come to mind. The first one is Present Over Perfect. And this is more for women. This is like Shauna Nyquist does an amazing job of digging into the mind of having to think you have to be busy for your value and that it is a badge of honor. And she's a very successful author and speaker. And she talks about how she wore herself out and someone who's still successful, but she's learned to prioritize. And so I think that was really good, learning to prioritize. The next one is The One Thing by Gary Keller.
Yes.
And I mean, I feel like I could read that like quarterly just to like help me with my mind, because again, I'm an overthinker and I need to simplify. I need tools to help me simplify things. And so I love how they talk about counterbalance and how, balance is actually this myth. But like you do kind of need some balance in your life in order for rest. And so I love that. And then the one I'm actually reading right now is Essentialism. I don't remember the name of the author.
Greg McEwen.
Yes.
Love that book.
I am like obsessed with it. I feel like if I could just read those 3 books, like in the Bible, like then I'd be set for life, right?
Absolutely. That is fantastic. So, readers like you, like me, like we have quotes that speak to us. And often we collect these quotes, these things that jump out and that remind us of a value or remind us of an aspirational goal. What's a favorite quote that you'd love to share?
Yeah. So when I have to tell myself like often is progress, not perfection. And anyone who struggles with perfectionism doesn't like that because it's like, oh, like if I'm capable of something, then it should be perfect. But that has held me back. That's paralyzed me. It doesn't work. And so just focusing on like, what is progress? And even if that's one baby step, one tiny edit, which is my whole premise for how I work with women is making things smaller, making things like more manageable. I have to do it myself. And so that has really just been impactful to me, that progress, not perfection.
Last chance, share one piece of advice with the leaders who are listening. If you could share one, what would that be?
Know yourself well, because the people you lead watch you. And many times they are going to watch you and learn from more what you do than what you say. And so when we know ourselves and we can be true to our values and we're actually living out like what we're doing and saying, then people are going to want to lead or to follow our lead. And so just being really, knowing yourself and being consistent with what you say and what you do.
Tabitha, I know our listeners are going to want to stay connected with you and continue learning from you. What is the best way for them to do that?
Sure. So I actually have my own podcast as well, called
Outstanding.
the Life Edit podcast with Tabatha Perry. So they can find me on that. And again, I just kind of break down big problems into small little pieces and then provide practical tips to make life more orderly and easier. And then they can find me at tabathaperry.coach. And that's my website. And they can find more about all the services that I provide.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. And most of all, for being so generous to share so much of your insight and your wisdom with our listeners. This has been so impactful. And I just can't say thank you enough.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, William.